does garbage collection impact my Why can't I have dessert for breakfast? Should I use percentiles or averages? Why do clocks help you? What's up with the number 42? What is the n+1 problem? Can exceptions ever be useful? Why don't developers like me? Why does Grandma smell funny?
Ask PerfBytes.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Ask PerfBytes. I'm your host, Brian Wilson, and I wear a mask. This episode's question comes from Chloe. Chloe asked PerfBytes, how can I make sure my tests are relevant? Well, thank you for the question, Chloe. To help us answer this question, I've asked Henrik Rexed from our show sponsor, Neotis, to help me. Bonjour, Henrik, and thank you for sponsoring the PerfBytes shows.
Well, so sorry, let's remove the mask. It will be easier to talk. Hey, hi. It's a good pleasure to be here.
I was like, what are you doing? That was just a funny sound I wasn't expecting. That's great. Yeah, thank you. It's awesome to have you again. I think you've been on a previous episode, if my memory serves well. It's so hard to keep track these days, between the different shows and all, but and all the stuff we do at Perform. But yes, thank you once again, and let me just preemptively say thank you for everything that you're doing for the world of performance. I think a lot of the cool integrations you're doing are just wonderful. So thank you for joining us, or me, Thanks. I should say, really. So, what brings you on the show today?
So let's bring me the show. First of all, let's answer that question. We have to definitely cover that one, and then also maybe I'd like to take a few seconds or a few minutes to remind to the community that the Jurassic Pack is coming in October, and the call for paper are open. So don't forget to submit your presentation if you want to be part of the show.
Great, excellent. We'll make sure we get some of that in at the end too. But this question is an interesting one. This one, how do I make sure my tests are relevant? This is something that plagued me my entire load testing career. Obviously now I'm on the monitoring side, but it was always, right, to me at least, and I want your interpretation of the question. To me, this kind of is rooted in the fact that anytime you're creating a load test, you are making a million assumptions about what the traffic patterns are, what the users are doing, and then you are completely and 100% falsely recreating that's what you think that is, in a synthetic, but not even synthetic, I guess a best guess kind of way on how this stuff operates. Cross your fingers that it's close enough to production, because being a testing cycle, that's all you can do, right? You can't use real user traffic these days. And hope for the best, right? I mean, it's very educated, I should say. It's very well planned, but it's still you're throwing it out there as this is what we can test for, right? But that doesn't really reflect reality. And
like you said, it's a simulation. So if you're doing your simulation in the wrong way, if you don't do the recommended best practices when it comes to building testing assets, and you just hit the cache, then you're going to prove that the cache is working well. And I think your project or your customer is not necessarily interested to say, hey, the cache is working. So yes, definitely, I think there is a need of making sure that the tests that we are running are relevant. And I'm pretty much tired now these days of hearing people saying that performance test or performance engineering doesn't make sense, because at the end of the day, it never reflects real life. So I think that type of comment is just disrupting our work, our job, our daily job. So I'd like to make sure that every test that we are trying to run from everywhere in the world is relevant. So then we don't have that type of comment anymore. That's really important.
Yeah, it's extremely so, because that used to always be the case in my day. But I actually thought of another aspect of this I want to make sure we talk about. So there's aspect number one is are the tests exercising the system in the way it's going to be exercised? Do the test cases and does the scenario make its best attempt at reproducing what's going on in production as much as you can, right? There's only so much you can handle with that. But then I think there's a secondary idea that just popped in my head of, is the test you're running relevant for what you're doing? Meaning, am I running a load test? Am I running a stress test? Am I running a soak test? Or something that came up a whole bunch in the beginning of Ask PerfBytes in the first few episodes, where there was the simple question of, what is the goal of this test? And are you running the test that tries to achieve that goal, as opposed to just saying, like in my old day, right, we used to just, probably about 90% of the tests were just a regression test. New build, run the same test, make sure nothing has changed. But we never stopped to think about why we're running that regression specifically and alone. Should we be doing something else? So I think that's kind of a second aspect that's very closely related. But there are two sides or two branches that lead to the same conclusion, I think. So I want to make sure we touch into both of those.
Maybe there's a fourth one, or third one, sorry, where I run a test. How can I make sure that the test that I've executed is good to be analyzed? Because maybe, I don't know, the load, the way we have generated load, the hit per seconds is not aligned with our ramp up. I mean, the basics. Just saying that I have a test results. Is it being considered like a good test or not? So that could also be also.
Is my environment relevant with that? A lot of Okay, so let's dive into it. There's a lot to unpack here. How do you want to tackle this first?
So maybe we can start with the order by the three things that we just described. So maybe the first one would say, back when I was a consultant, and I'm pretty sure you did the same, when I had a web app application that was publicly available and the customer had Google Analytics, I was basically doing a full extraction of the period that was considered like a risk for the customer. Extracting all the traffic, and then you have a lot of URLs. It's really interesting, but then you have to work with someone which is functional experts and say, this is the man clothes, this is the kid toys sections, I don't know, whatever it is. And so then you can figure out where all those traffic is going in which areas. So then you can say, okay, if I need to reflect that type of behavior, then I wouldn't have that type of test script. And then also, okay, so I want to basically replay what happened during the last Black Friday. Then I want to figure out how those users have been ramping up on my environment. So maybe we'll be also, I can extract them from there. So we were doing that mainly manually. So Excel sheet was our good friend at that time. I mean, I was using Excel sheet, but now I think people can use other techniques with Tableau or R or whatever it is to model that, I think. But then there's all today, I think, from except of tracking systems. Tracking systems is pretty good, but it's what I observed recently is that most of the time, performance engineers has not access to it because Google Analytics is considered to be a marketing tool. Yep. So when suddenly you say someone with a geek experts comes to the meeting and say, hey, can I have a request to the Google Analytics? And say, well, what do you want to do that? Then you have to explain and indicate people. So that's also something that also discovered recently. And the other thing is when you do the Google Analytics for mobile, it's more even more complicated because you don't have requests. You have classes of the native app where the user has clicked on it, so it's even hard to utilize that information to build your workload. And I think then there's other tools. I mean, Dynatrace, for example, where you have so many information from that you're collecting. So you're pretty sure that you can also collect that information to build the right workload depending on our risks, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, definitely the real user monitoring aspects from tools like Dynatrace, since you mentioned it, can be extremely, extremely helpful in that. But the one thing I would caution with getting any of that information, right? And this goes back to, again, my previous, when I was last load testing, it was at, and I ran into all these problems that we're talking about today in my last job, and I've mentioned some of them on previous shows too, so they'll probably come up again. And people will be like, "Oh, that story again." But we had back then Omniture, right? This is back around 2000, late 2009, 2008. And one of the things I discovered, at least in Omniture, and I don't know if it applies everywhere, but there are ways in many tools where you can also group page types or something together into another parent. So when you're talking about getting access to the tools to look at the data, you also have to know if you're just going in, which 99% of the cases, right? They're just going to give you read access to what they have. You're not going to be able to create your own measures or anything else in the tools. If, it's something that especially marketing or business owns, whatever you're seeing as like this page, right? The performance and traffic and everything to this page. Well, what does that mean? Are there 2 or 3 versions of that page or different places that they consider? Like think about login, right? Let's take that's usually the easiest one. Sometimes you have a full screen login. You click you click a login button, and in the middle of the screen is a box to log in, right? And you hit login, and it's a dedicated page. Sometimes it's the next HR action. The top right-hand corner, there's a login button, which gives you a little tiny pop-up. Doesn't change the main page, and it does a login there. And those might be different URLs. They might be hitting slightly different APIs to get to the login and everything. But from that analytics tool, that might be just login, right? So when you're looking to, how do we test login? It all hits the main login at, 50 times per hour, or whatever it might be. Well, if there's 2 branches of it and maybe 2 of them are hitting 2 different APIs, that's something that might not be under that. So when you do get access to that data, you have to then question further, how is that set up? Because the people setting that up weren't thinking of it from the technical, as you said, from the geek side that you need to design your test from. So it's very helpful, but if you don't look under the covers, that could misinform you, I think at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think now we did so much improvement now with the in terms of technology. So I think I'm thinking of machine learning, and if we feed all that data to a machine learning algorithm, then I mean, if you don't limit to something that says that's login, but just give you back the URLs that has happened back in the scene. Then at the end of the day, if you analyze a relevant day of production with all the HTTP request that has been generated, then you can say, okay, it seems that 90% of the user are hitting their URL to reach out to the application. So that's I think with that technology and the improvement of or more utilizing the algorithm that has used to be used essentially by the healthcare or the pharma industry, and now we can do tremendous things for in performance testing. I think that's what I think. I think it's the major improvement in our day-to-day job if we can utilize those algorithms more and more for us.
Right, and I can't remember the. I'm trying to look and I can't find it here. If it comes back, I'll bring it up. But there was a Andy and I on Pure Performance. We had done an interview with somebody from a team who the AI thing, right? Because that sounds like a little bit of a fantasy idea, but it's not. Someone from they were using the Dynatrace RUM data.
I know. Thomas Roté from
yes, Probit, was it?
Yeah, Probit. Yeah,
yes, okay.
Definitely. They were getting all the data from Dynatrace RUM, and then they were basically parsing it and collecting it, and out of that they were showing the main user flows and converting those into Selenium scripts. Because in fact, if you look at the RUM data that you're getting out of Dynatrace, it's pretty much tied to the browser action, to the DOM. Yeah. So it makes total sense. I mean, to translate that into Selenium script or something that drive a real browser, then do a protocol-based traditional load testing approach, I think.
Right, but that at least if you throw those into like an AI like that one, or if you build your own or something else, right, that can then look at to me the biggest challenge when putting together your load scenario and what the users are going to do is figuring out what it is that the users do, right? Because you can execute a test in 2 ways. If you think about taking it on the far one side, if you're just testing an API, you just have to hit those API endpoints at the rate that they're hit, right? But when you're thinking about it from a browser, and where user sessions are stored in memory on the different servers in different places, getting those user flows and the user journeys, even if it is a protocol-based script, is still important, because then you have all the threads and the memory sections being used up and all that. There's all other things that go on beyond just the code executing that occur if a user is hitting it with the same session over or through a journey. So that can at least then take and say, what are the common paths through the system that if I'm going to write a script, I want my script to flow through, right? That is if you're going to do a journey type of a script instead of just a script to hit login, a script to hit this page. There are different use cases for those different types, but I think the AI is wonderful in that case because you can then say, this is not, 80% of our users use the site in this way. Therefore, we'll generate our scripts to reflect the 80% of our users, and, the rest are just too numerous and too varied to cover. So we'll get as close as we can with this.
Yeah, so that I think we with this approach, but analyzing the traffic through APM or through tracking systems or even HTTP access log, I would say. But that will be even harder because you will have just a big list of requests. You will have to group those requests to a user. So that will be a bigger challenge. But still, it's still possible. So I think that is a proper way of giving you a picture of what is currently happening or what happened few months or years back in your production environment. But then you told it, you made that point in the beginning and saying, yeah, but sometimes I'm releasing something, and I know, for example, with the COVID-19, people are the increase of buying online is just enormous, and people now are considering in the next month to still change the way of are consuming, mainly by internet. So it means that there will be a spike in the traffic. So here, if you just test what you were seeing last year, then maybe your test that you're going to do to secure, I don't know, the Black Friday of this year won't make sense. So maybe there is a notion of predictive, or maybe what should I test to make sure that I'm not going to have a disaster in my production environment? So this is a bit more tricky, I think, because it's pretty easy to test something that we know we control because we have the data and we have everything that is observing this. So it's pretty easy to reproduce it. But now, what about, okay, so I'm launching that app. I think that I should have that type of traffic. But then it's a pure guessing. It's a pure, we are betting on something.
And I think a lot of that can be somewhat mitigated, right? This all depends on how much time you have and what sort of relationships you have. If bringing up the old buzzword of DevOps, right? I think one of the things that we try to understand about that is it's not just the things about developers and operations, but the idea of breaking down silos and having everybody work together, including product, including marketing, including the performance teams. And I think for those reasons, it's very important to have someone on the performance team. Maybe you pick one liaison, right? To work with business, to work with product, to work with marketing, to understand what they're because they're doing all the research. Marketing, their job is to look at the future trends. Their job is to look at what's happening in the industry to say, okay, Black Friday is coming up again, or Cyber Monday, whatever we're calling it these days. And what, based on what we're seeing with current at-home COVID shopping patterns, what is the predicted market forecast for how that's going to impact sales this year or traffic this year on that, so that you can get from them what they're expecting, what they're planning for, and at the very least, be in alignment with what the business team sees, so that if you do get it wrong, at least everybody got it wrong, and it wasn't because, we just didn't think about it or we chose our own path. It's, bring everybody together and say, this is where we're seeing everything go. This is how we test it. Because even if marketing is just going to do a campaign, these relationships are extremely important, because if marketing is just going to put a new campaign out there and you don't know about it, and they're expecting they're banking on a 50% increase in spike of traffic when they drop this out there, your site might not even be able to support it. So if you have that relationship and they're telling you these things well in advance, you can inform them to say, well, we can't support that kind of a spike. We've never seen that kind of a spike from your marketing campaigns in the past, because we can take a look back at the production data and said, even though you predicted 50%, we had a 15% only, right? So do we need to suddenly get the operations team to scale up or make some changes to the site to handle this 50% because you're really going to get it this time? Or based on history, it's not going to happen, so let's make sure we can handle 10%, but that all falls into the realm, at least to me, of performance and having someone on the performance team having that relationship. Because going back to what you said right in the beginning, when people say performance isn't relevant for like the performance testing team, this is how you make it relevant. You tie it into the business directly. You tie it into the owners. You tie it into marketing so that there are none of those surprise outages because we had a Super Bowl commercial or something, right? And that then makes your test relevant again, bringing it full circle.
Yeah, and I think you told. I mean, having this connection makes total sense. And if you're afraid of what's going to happen, I think even if you don't have a clear numbers of your marketing team, because maybe the marketing team is more about, I want to get leads and I don't care about prediction, and then you're not able to discover anything. So I think let's figure out what is your limit, how much you can handle. So then at least you can anticipate, and also if you have we discussed about it not today, but if I have remediation scripts or anything that can cover some bad things, maybe because it's a program or it's a logic or it's an algorithm behind the scene, maybe it would make sense to test that remediation while you're doing load test, just to make sure that what you're going to expect out of that is going to work, and there won't be any impact on your user or on your business because it didn't work in time or properly.
Yeah, and that's extremely relevant too, just to tie it into the question that brought us here, because as you're saying, that's going to happen. It's probably going to happen in production. If you have that's the whole point of self-healing, right? Is you don't have to stop everything and do a release. It's just going to happen whenever the symptom occurs. The fix is going to get pushed, or whatever the remediation might be, so that if you do test during remediations, if you go back to our good pal Mark Tomlinson, when they had the continuous load testing environment and they had load going, because the whole idea was we're going to do deployments in the middle of the day, so we want to make sure performance doesn't get impacted during the deployment. So have a load test going on if you're doing an orchestrated deployment where you're rolling out 1%, 2% increasing and switching over things, blue-green deployments, however that is. It's important to run load during that so that you can make sure that the traffic does not get impacted. So that again is, I think this kind of brings us into, I don't know if it was the second or third point though, but the idea of what is your test and what is the goal of the test and is it relevant? Because if you just go back to running that regression, as we were saying earlier, that's not going to tackle your spike in traffic. In that case, you would maybe say, well, let's do a capacity test to understand what we can handle. We don't know what it's going to be. As you said, we might not, our marketing might only be looking for leads, but this thing's going to happen anyway. What can we handle so that everyone now knows, based on the models at least, what the site can handle, so that when you start getting into that region, they can plan for what to do once you start getting close to that capacity.
And I think to answer the second part of the question, I always say that the type of test that you're planning to run is pretty much tied to the environment where you're running your test.
Yeah.
If you're running in a small dev environment, of course, I'm not going to do a limit test. Of course, I'm going to do a soak test. I'm going to mainly do some regression testing. So I'm doing the same load pattern to detect that if that commit didn't impact the behavior on my application on that particular environment, because I have already had a baseline on environments. I know how it behaves in normal conditions and so on. If I go to another bigger environment where I have integration or QA or whatever it is, where I have more nodes, more things, then it would make sense, like you mentioned, if I have a load balancer in the middle of the picture, I would like to. I need to double check that load balancer is doing what it expected, because there is always human mistakes. It always happened. Maybe you have you thought about a specific way of load balancing your traffic, but it was not well configured, so the expectation are that there. So just controlling that in a QA, it's always good. You're detecting that issue way more before. Same thing for the cache. I mean, if you have a cache policy, we know that it's going to be it's going to expire at a certain time, then maybe I'd like to test that situation. What would happen if there is no cache? That type of things. So that there's tons of things you can test, and I think depending in a QA, maybe you have less nodes, so you're fishing for do I have any memory leak? Do I do my load balancing working properly? Stuff like this. And then if I move to pre-production or a performance environment, if I have the luxury to have that, then I can maybe see, okay, maybe I can test some behavior network with including some traffic in the network to see if the pipes are if it's already occupied. If I include that extra traffic, do I have any issues there? I do a chaos monkey engineering with near load testing, for example, like failover testing, like we described, remediation, all those type of things. I think depending on the environment, there are different type of tests that you can achieve, and every sort of test that you're running will cover specific risks related to how your application will be utilized by your users. I mean, if you know, for example, I have a call center. I'm managing call center, and I know that every morning at 8 p.m. this call center opens to the public. So it means that 7:30 to 8, most of my employees will connect there. Maybe they connect, they grab a coffee. So maybe there is a big spike in connections, not much load happening, and then the calls start to open. So maybe I want to make sure that every morning, once all those different geos connect in that call center application, I don't have any major problems. So there is tons of things where you can control just by understanding how your application is utilizing. I mean, knowing the context, knowing your app, knowing how it's been used would definitely help you to test the right things.
Yeah, I think that also ties directly into the title of the show, right? Ask Perf Bytes, and the key word to me is ask. And whenever I think of load testing, the first thing I think you have to do is ask yourself, what am I testing? Right? And it's a scientific process. Load testing isn't just like, hey, let's throw traffic on it and see what happens. There's a hypothesis that you're going to test. Every load test should be being run to answer a question. And if you can define that question, you'll know, okay, call center, we're trying to test that, how the traffic on the call center works. All right, so now I need to know the performance patterns in production of the call center. Oh, I see this little spike and then it goes away and then it comes back like you're describing in the morning with the coffee, right? That gets you to understand or to think about and discover what might be relevant for testing. So it always comes back to me of what are you trying to test? And if you can answer that, or if you can make that your hypothesis, you can then build a much more relevant test and take a much more relevant and poignant approach towards achieving that goal. Right.
And you will never be able to test everything.
No.
That's impossible, because we are always we always have short windows to test. So I think it's detecting what is the most important in terms of risks. What should I test? Spend more time testing to reduce any problems in production. This is also a key part of the work of a performance engineer, saying that, okay, this situation is more important because I've been discussing and had that feedback from the business, whatever, or the application owner, and then I will focus my test on this. This is also important. You don't want to test everything is impossible, for sure.
Yeah. But I know this is going to sound like fantasy, right? But if you do have the luxury of having a full-blown performance environment or multiples or stuff, right? In my entire career, every load test I ran was tied specifically to a release. There was nothing done outside of a release. But if you happen to have the luxury of it, or maybe you work at a company where they really take testing seriously and all that, there's also the idea that the tests don't have to be tied to a release, right? The morning call center thing you mentioned isn't necessarily something that's tied to a release, but these are patterns that you can look at and say, hey, let's test this outside of a release just to see what's going on. A lot of times a capacity test isn't necessarily tied to a release. You're just at a point in time trying to find the capacity of your system at whatever state it's in, right? So you have an understanding. So again, it's far-fetched, I know, but when you think of a lot of these other scenarios that might come up that are really interesting and be really good for business to know, they don't have to be tied to a release if you have the luxury of being able to do them. But that's probably maybe one or two people out there could do that. I don't know. It's unfortunate because there's so many cool things. I always think about way back when I was running the team over at WebMD. At one point, I was joking around like I wanted to get all of us lab coats because we were, and I don't mean to disparage the rest of QA and all, but I think there's, from a mindset point of view, there was quite a difference between the performance team and the functional QA team. Whereas we really were taking that mad scientist approach to it. And I was just like, hey, it would be great if we had lab coats and we just kind of operated a little differently. So people knew we were trying to think differently and look at things differently, and just came up with these ideas of like, here's an experiment based on production. Let's see what happens when we test it and put it through the ringer, right? And see if we can, there was so much play I wanted to do, but obviously we never had the time and the lab coats were too expensive. So neither of them happened.
But that could be a really good way of being promoting. So don't give me more money. I just want to have lab coats, please. Please.
to wear in my office where the air conditioner doesn't always work. Go on. You go.
No, so as I was saying that we didn't answer the third part.
Right, that's where I wanted to go to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the third part was what again? Just bring that up to refresh my memory. I kind of had an idea, but let's, for our listeners, pretend my head is the listeners and refresh my memory.
So basically, I run a test, and then how can I decide? I think it's more for beginners that are never been so much in performance testing. But how can I tell myself, okay, that test makes sense.
Yeah.
This one, I can keep it. And I can basically spend hours or dig in the numbers or all the different metrics I'm collecting from different tools to understand what happened. So there are, of course, from all the tests you're going to run, there are tests that doesn't make sense because basically there are some key things that you should look at. So I think it's what should a performance engineer should pay attention when he is getting a results out of a test.
Yes. Okay. So what?
So I think first of all, I mean there are clear objectives.
Yes.
That from the two first answers that we had here, based on the workload that you have, that was the objective of your test, saying I want to have that type of ramp up, and I want to have 100 sales order per minute, for example, or things like this. So maybe first look at those numbers, but before even looking at those numbers of the objectives, there are 3 or 4 indicators or basics. I mean, hit per seconds, throughput, response, user load, and of course, error rates.
Yeah.
If you just look at those 4 metrics, you can say, okay, it seems okay, so I can start analyzing. Or it just in one look you can say, oh, there is something wrong here. I have to understand why.
Yeah.
So I think first of all, if you do a ramp up, so your user load will increase. That's normal. That's as expected. And then you should expect that your hit per seconds should follow your load. I mean, if you're ramping up, then you should pay attention to the hit per second that is also aligned to that curve. Same thing with the throughput. If I am adding more user, I will expect that I have more throughput in the network as well. So those are and if I see that there's a drop, then I can definitely assume that the response time is increasing somewhere, or there's
the
errors.
Engineering team was just so fantastic and they made such great improvements that the throughput was able to go down because everything. I'm kidding.
Yeah, but if I increase user, I should see at least I should see the network increase. Otherwise, I can consider there's maybe a problem in the network or somewhere. Right. But the same thing, if I have too many errors, does it make sense to analyze? I mean, if I'm only collecting errors from my tests, then it means that first of all, I'm not able to achieve my objectives because maybe I'm hitting some HTTP 500, or maybe it's just a assertion problem where I'm expecting to be on this sales page, but I'm not. In fact, I am somewhere else. Or so if you have too many errors, it definitely means that the objectives of reaching these 100 sales order per minute, I will never achieve it because I was basically doing something else in the background.
Right.
So we'll pay attention to errors. And if you have too many errors, don't tell yourself that it's only because of the app. Maybe it's because of you.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's because of the way you've designed your scripts.
We've all been there. We've all done that. We've all done that. I just keep saying that it's okay. It's okay to do that. I learned so much by screwing up my load tests. I learned so much by the developers who quite often will be like, "Oh, it must be your test," and I'm like, "No way, my test is perfect." And then they start asking questions, and I'm like, "You bring up cache, right? This was before I understood concepts of cache way back." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm using the same terms in here all the time." They're like, "Yeah, but people don't use the same ones in reality." I'm like, "Oh crap, Well, gee, that just opened a whole new can of worms, I know it sounds like so basic and simple, but these are the mistakes you make in the beginning, and it's great because you learn from them. You have those conversations with the developer, and you learn something more about how these things all worked. When a garbage collection was explained to me for the first time, bam, light bulbs all, everything starts firing. So, yeah, anyway, didn't mean to go off on that, but to me, it's like, those are great. If you're working with a sympathetic development team and looking at that stuff, and they're going to help, bring your level up by explaining these things to you, don't be embarrassed by them. You can learn so much from them. But yes, go on. Sorry. I think it's the first rule. It's always think that what you have achieved was bad. So never pretend that your work is perfect, because in most of the cases you discover that sometimes it's not so perfect and that you thought. And also the data sets. I mean, don't take every data set like working and perfect, because maybe someone has spent time to generate it. Maybe the data set that someone has shared with you is maybe not so useful for performance. So this is also things that is important, because we are going to generate volumes at the end of the day. So if the data that you're going to using for your volume is wrong or is not accurate, then in fact, something bad's going to happen somewhere. Yeah, and just to harp on that last point again, and I mentioned this before, but even if you have the right data set, using it within your scripts correctly is important. Just the example, which I'm sure the users have heard before, is I used to have to test a bunch of different. We had page types. So on WebMD, there were different page types. There was an info page, basically different CMS type of categories. So there would be different widgets on the pages and all. So we'd have lists of URLs that had the different page types, and those would go into the different scripts. And I would just set it on. So I had a good data set, but for hitting the pages, I would just set the test to grab a random URL from the list. Right. So the entire one test script had maybe 10,000 URLs in it. So I'm hitting them all at random. Well, we're not hitting any cache at that point. In reality, there's maybe 10% of those pages that get hit a lot more in production than they do in non-production. So having the right data set is step one, but using that data set properly in the script, whether it's random, how you load the randomness, if it's a subset that you use so that you're matching those cache hits and all that, that's step two. So there are multiple, everything. Man, sometimes I'm so glad I'm out of the test design side, because there are so many. Every time you think you conquered something, that opens up a new thing that you have to consider. It just goes deeper and deeper. Sometimes it gets overwhelming for sure. It's sorry, having flashbacks.
Yeah, but that's what I like with this work, because it's a bit like be a detective.
You're right.
So you first dig something, and then you realize there is something else, and then so it's never ends, never ends.
And then you got the Illuminati coming after you, and then Anyhow, so going back to the thing. So you're talking about checking that your data looks right, and I think even before waiting, that you can even observe that during ramp up, right? You don't have to wait till the test finishes. These components that you mentioned ahead of time, don't walk away from your test immediately. Run it, make sure it's taking off, and then you can maybe go walk away or do something. But these are the basics, right? And these are the basics of every load testing tool. That's why they're in there, right? I mean, if we especially on the APM side talk about all these other little awesome bits of data, but this is like, if you're going to have, like, your car dashboard can't have every single diagnostic for the car, and it has the key elements. And these are what you're mentioning, the throughput, the hits, the response times, and the errors. That is the most fundamental in your test, I think, in determining if it's doing what you're asking for. So beyond that, then, how do we make sure that the test is relevant, if there's any more on that side?
No, I think maybe, if we have the luxury of having the traffic, that if you have a test that reflects something that happened in production, maybe if we had the underlying traffic from the production and then comparing, say, okay, this is what I've generated for my test and this is what I generated for my production. Am I close to it? I won't be never at 100% close to it, because again, it's a simulation. But am I maybe at almost at 10-15% close to my production? Yes, then yeah, I'm good to go there. But I think most of the time, what happens is people are looking at numbers. So saying, I need to do that amount of cells per second or per minute, or I need to I need to do that amount of hit per second because I observed that in production. So looking at those numbers to validate makes sense, and that will be a good start. And you mentioned it, if you don't know your app properly, so never run a test automatically, like you described, Brian. You need to be in front of your screen, understand, okay, so if I add some load here, this component has this behavior. This happened in the back end, stuff like this. And same thing with the database. Maybe if you have the luxury of the right people or the experts around you, maybe you should ask them, oh, could you check on the database? Did we create the relevant number of assets in database related to my test, or to? If not, maybe there is something wrong. So there are a few things that we should control, not only on the load testing side, but the other areas or other tools will give you the right information to let you decide if your test makes sense or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, there's a lot to. There's so much going on, and this is what always killed me. Like when you become aware of the right ways to do these tests, and not just I came out of it from QA. From functional testing to performance, and it was the original mindset of, okay, just running through a checklist, but now doing it under load, as opposed to you start looking at the larger performance practice. When you're in when you're aware of the larger practice of performance, it always feels like I'm being stabbed in the heart when people say, oh, well, performance testing isn't relevant, because it's such a science. It's such a deep practice that can reveal so much that it's a shame that people often misunderstand it for just some checkbox, and I think a lot of the people who misunderstand it for a checkbox end up feeling the pain of that later on. So hopefully people will continue to appreciate it. Is there anything else on this topic? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think we covered pretty very well. I hope that the people that is listening to the show is happy about our answers. Oh, if not, then we have to do a second round.
Yeah, sure. Send us a question if we touched on something. I think there's a good segue here into the next bit, because one thing I was going to say is it sounds, when we talk about this, I think for anyone listening, even myself listening to our conversation as we're having it, which I wonder if I can think about myself listening to our conversation as we're having, I'm just trying to go into some kind of meta loop there. It's very, very overwhelming, right? When you think about trying to find all the different data sources, trying to get access to them, trying to get information from team A, from team B, checking with the DBA teams to see, like you mentioned there at the end, and then going through and analyzing all of this information. I think one of the benefits of being in performance today versus maybe, almost 10 years ago when I left it, is that there are tools that can help you with this. Automation can help you with this. We've seen the integration that you've done between Dynatrace and Neotis. We're pretty well aware, or at least some of us are aware, of the idea that Andy Grabner is doing with the automated test comparisons, part of the Captain Quality Gate, if you want to think of it in terms of that, where if you can reduce, there are tools now that can help you simplify your analysis. Right, at least do some of the early levels. Right, you're always going to want to go in probably and check certain things, but I would just stress to the listeners that there are ways to do automated analysis, automated difference comparisons on all the key metrics that you're looking at during a test, so that at least part of that job can be alleviated from you, so that you can focus on these other concepts that we're talking about. Right, automation is not something terrible that's going to take your job away. It's going to free you up to focus on things like making it more relevant. So segueing from the automation to some other post question topics you wanted to talk about, what's going on in the world of Neoload?
So yeah, basically it's beginning of August, so we're gonna have a release in 3 days. I think it's gonna be 3 days. The 7.5, and you just described the Dynatrace integration that we built in the past, and I showcase it in Perform, and the market was pretty much good feedback on that. So that's pretty amazing. And now all the work that I've done has been now productized. So the product team has taken it, put officially in the 7.5 product. So no need anymore of plugin anymore. You can configure based on tags again your Dynatrace your test, because we think that you can have different tags based on different tests. Remember, we mentioned it. Mm-hmm. Different type of tests will cover different type of risks. So maybe you won't necessarily want to collect metrics from Dynatrace on the same areas. So you can define tags based on the in your load, and you can define also this anomaly detection rules directly in your test description in your load. So you can say, okay, so this metric, if it reached this is going to be a performance problem, or it could be an infrastructure problem, or whatever it is. So then they will basically open up problem tickets in Dynatrace.
Wait,
and the monitoring is pretty...
I was going to say, can we pause there for a moment? Because that sounds really, really exciting. So the first I'm hearing of that. So what you're basically saying, if I get this correctly, let's say I'm running a regression and I'm used to my system performing at a certain response time. My servers run at a certain amount of CPU utilization. My error rate is X, Y. A lot of the things you would maybe check, or maybe we would use for the automated regression analysis. You're saying you can feed those metrics in as part of your load, your test definition, and that will instruct Dynatrace to have to set a threshold to say, if during the test we breach this, it's going to open a ticket and let you know your test is having a problem.
Yeah, but in fact, everything was based on the first edition of the integration I built, and I was a bit frustrated because when I used it in other areas out of production, then the magic of the AI was not there. And I said, shish. The AI was detecting tons of problems. That was amazing. And then I say, and then I just discussed with Andy, and then I say, okay, so what I'm going to do now is have the options for the testers knowing his app, saying, okay, so if this component or this piece is over-consuming CPU or memory or whatever it is, the rule that you need to define is based on a Dynatrace metric. So if you know your application pretty well, you can define those rules. And at the beginning of the test, Neoload are sending those rules to Dynatrace. And then if something bad happened, Dynatrace, of course, will track the problems with the naming with Neoload. And the beauty is, at the end of the test, if you have your problems opened, then you can click on them. It filters your tests or your the moment of where that problem happened. It filters your data there, and it's so efficient in terms of productivity. You can basically dig in the data directly there without being need to filter or browse in Dynatrace. So having problem tickets is a very powerful thing, I think, from my perspective, especially when you do load testing.
Well, it's great. I mean, this goes back to conversations. I think we all. I mean, as Andy and I on the Pure Performance podcast, but I think we've all had in the past, and even basic concepts of DevOps, of shifting everything left. And if you think about it, some of those can be even defined on the developer side, right? Not under load. Trying to clarify let me try to clarify this here, right? So you can say maybe a developer is writing some code, and they say under no load, this should take X amount of time. We should see no exceptions. It's going to make 3 database calls, and this code is going to itself consume maybe 200 milliseconds of CPU time, right? Those, and we've had these conversations with Gorenka from Facebook as well for the capacity management sides. These are things that can persist throughout the life cycle to make sure that they stay the same as expected. So if the developer actually does that, passes that on to the performance team, maybe the response time will change under load a little bit, right? Because the developer might be just looking at a one-time hit. But now what you're saying there is you can have the performance team take those requirements and either manually or via automation, right? Define those response time of the code, calls to the database, all this kind of stuff, pop that in with their test, all these different components. It's going to create a rule set so that, as I was just talking about, I swear I did not know about this. Now you'll get alerts on if it is violating that, right? And it didn't do what you expected to do, right? The developer is writing this to say, this is what we're going to do. We're improving this transaction by reducing it from 10 database calls down to 3, right? We should never see more than 3. Well, hey, maybe the performance of it's great, but it's making 5 database calls. Fail, right? You didn't under load, something happens and it jumps up. I don't know why that would happen, but that's just amazing. It just really makes it so much more visible. And yeah, sorry. I love this. Sorry. There's more to it though, right? That one spot just really got me there. So it's beyond the alerting part.
Of course we're sending events like traditional thing. Mm-hmm. But what is pretty much powerful, I think, is at the beginning of the test, we take your main tag. We are going through the dependency with the help of Dynatrace, and we're putting a technical tag called neoload dash, the name of the tag, and basically the entire architecture with all your dependency will be marked. Why do we do that? Because we want to grab automatically the monitor. So at the moment, we're keeping some key indicators that we know that it will be there. Now we also have an option with in Neoload where you can go through the Dynatrace metric trees and pick the metrics that you would like to collect extra out of what's going to collect by Neoload. And we are waiting for an API from Dynatrace, but what we're going to do next is we're going to scan Dynatrace, and if we detect that, this is a Node.js app, and Dynatrace is picking some specific Node.js metrics, so we're going to automatically collect those. So I think because at the moment we are collecting infrastructure metrics, service metrics, also some process metrics, of course. But sometimes there are some technology metrics based on container that you're collecting, which is pretty interesting as well. And I would love to have something that say, I don't know my app, but Neoload and Dynatrace working together, they will bring you the right counters or right indicators that will help you to analyze. So this is also something we do. End of the test, of course, once the test is finished, we clean up the Dynatrace environment to make sure that there is no technical Neoload tags left or anomaly detection rules left. So then your environment, Dynatrace environment, will be as it is before you just launch a test. So I think it's even better. And it brings the integration to the hands of anyone without having the need of installing a plugin, putting a workflow side of your load. So it makes your life super easier. And the other advantage we have is we released the S code 2-3 years ago, and I wanted to have a developer approach of configuring this Dynatrace integration. So now with the S code, which is a YAML description language, you can create the list in a YAML format of the anomaly detection rules you want to have, the tags you want to have, everything, in fact. So you don't need necessarily to open Neoload. You can create your YAML files and have everything and take advantage of both Neoload and Dynatrace in the same time. So I think I'm pretty very excited about this 705, because I think it's bring all the different things we build together between Dynatrace and Neotis in terms of value for the market. Mm-hmm. And now it's going to be there and very easy for everyone to use it. So I'm pretty excited with it.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack there, but a couple of things I wanted to comment on. Number one is, first of all, just thank you, right, for continuing to push the boundaries of the integrations and automating some of these aspects, because all this stuff is hard to do for the testing teams and all that, and now analyzing it, and it's just making it great. And we've seen, I'm not going to mention names, right, but we've seen load testing tools stagnate, right? And I just really appreciate that you all at Neotis are not stagnating. You're pushing the boundaries. You're keeping everything relevant. So it's just really great to see. Number two, I got to say thank you for I was going to ask you about, does it clean up afterward? I didn't want to ask you in case your answer was no, but since you said you do that, thank you, because I think that's really important. And the biggest thank you I got to give you, now that this is being productized by Neoload or Neotis, right, is that now whenever anybody asks me, like they're having problems with the integration, I can be like, well, it's part of the Neotis product. Go ask their support. No, seriously, it's wonderful stuff that you're all doing there. It's really exciting. And I can imagine, right, that a lot of what you're doing, not just necessarily with the Dynatrace side, but just the integrations and the sharing of data between tools and all. I know you've been doing a lot of work with Akamai, and I'm sure that all feeds into the similar and same kinds of ways of things going on, where data from one tool can help inform another tool. And we've seen, at least at Dynatrace, we've seen some integrations and some things with like OpenShift, and talking with some of the other vendors, how they use the data. And it's just great to see how companies are using their APIs and leveraging this to take data from one tool, pass it to another one, and just have these, I don't want to call them machines because they're just really programs, right? But having these programs communicate with each other and share data and be able to do things on it. So it's great to see it in practice. So really appreciate what you all are doing there.
Cool. Thanks for feedback.
Hey, no problem. Anything else before we close up the show that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, just to remind you that there's the Jurassic Pack coming up on the 7th. So the official date will be the 7th to the 8th of October. So at the moment, there is no way of being able to register to the conference. We are more opening up the call for papers. So if you didn't know the concept of the virtual pack, so the pack is first of all the Performance Advisory Council.
Right. It used to be known as you had the Pac-Man theme going on at one point, right?
Yeah.
And I like how you keep on keeping it tied with a sort of a pun there. So Jurassic Pack, yeah. But
so it's now we used to have a physical event, so we did it before the lockdown. So I don't know if we will have other physical event in the future. Maybe we'll change the format of it. But the Jurassic Pack is aligned with the virtual pack. Mm-hmm. So last year we did the Pack Back to the Future.
Yep.
Pack to the Future. Sorry. Now it's Jurassic Pack, and it's the virtual conference. So it's a 24-hour live streaming event, and the idea is that we're following the sun. So we here it's going to be different because we have a lot of ideas with Jurassic Pack, so it's pretty amazing. So stay tuned. You will see our website will be amazing. There is a lot of things we're going to work on, but the concept is kind of similar. We have a list of speakers from Australia, New Zealand, speakers from the Asian countries, so India and others, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're moving on to Europe, then and US East and US West. So the idea is to bring the experts around the globe, share their experience. And here, the pack is mainly to education, so sharing things.
Yep.
Explaining concept, doing a lot of sort of cookbook where you explain a concept, then you do some screen sharing and you go through examples. So I think it's a good e-learning platform, sort of. So if people wants to learn things, I definitely recommend to go to the pack. And if you have expertise and you want to share it to the community, please submit your presentation before the end of this month. We will select the speakers beginning of September. So if you want to be part of that, you can go to LinkedIn and search for Performance Advisory Council. So there's a specific page for that, and then you'll see that there is a link where you can submit your presentation. Otherwise, you can also have access to it through our website, which is neotys.com, neotys.com/performance-advisory-council. So stay tuned. You will hear more about it. And to do the promotion, I recently did a funny video about it. So
I'll have to check that out.
If you want to check it out, look at LinkedIn. I did a small teaser. So if you want to watch it, that will be great.
And it's free, right? Or is there a fee for this? I believe it was.
No, everything is free. So right. It's a free online conference. And,
right. So if you sign up, you get access to it. You don't have to. You stay up for the full 24 hours typically, don't you? Are you going to do that again this time around, or is your age catching up with you finally?
No. I did it last year. I did so it's our third edition. So I did it the two first editions, and here I'm going to do it again. So I think it brings extra motivation to see if I'm going to break or not during the conference.
If you're going to have a heart attack live in the session because of all the caffeine, people love watching car crashes. Maybe hopefully that won't happen though. But yeah, it's great. I've definitely checked them out. So sign up, you get access to all the videos. They're great. There's just a lot of great speakers, great ideas. And as Henrik said, if you have something, mention it. And I would say don't be shy. Even though I usually don't do any of these things, only because in my head I think, well, what do I have to say that I don't say on the podcast? And I really don't say them on the podcast anyway. But what do I have to say? Or I'm busy. But at the same time, it's like there are voices, right? You have experience. You have something. Throw it out there. This is a great opportunity too. Because look, Henrik's got to fill up 24 hours. So I would say if you have ideas, reach out, be part of it. Start getting onto this. It's really fun when you present to people. And people just share ideas. So collaboration is great. Another great thing that you all do. I give a big hug to you all, Henrik. All the stuff that you're doing for performance and for all this. It's great. It's great. Great leadership in that world. All right. So, I'll ask one more time. Any last thoughts before we close out?
No, I think now it's a good time to enjoy a vacation, kids. Have fun. So that's my only thing. So stay home, stay safe, and enjoy your family.
Yep. All right. Well, once again, to everyone listening today, and Chloe, thank you for sending your question to us. We hope you learned a little bit from our response. I sure did. A big thanks to Henrik Rexed for helping with today's question, and thanks to Neotis for sponsoring Ask Perf Bites. If you have any questions for Ask Perf Bites, please send your questions to ask@perfbites.com or follow me on Twitter at AskPerfBites or at Emperor Wilson, or you can leave a voicemail. Did you know that, Henrik? We have a voicemail. You can leave a voicemail at 77-LOAD-PERF. That's 775-623-7373. And that will go to Mark Tomlinson. So if you feel like just pranking him, make the call. You can always subscribe to at Ask Perf Bites on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Overcast, TuneIn, etc. And if you like performance podcasts, please be sure to check out Pure Performance, which I co-host with Andy Grabner. Henrik, are you still doing the cooking, or you've been a little sporadic? Are those still going on?
Yeah, I didn't have much time. I have a lot of ideas. It's just lack of time, but I definitely have to continue because I think it's a good format as well.
Yeah, so Henrik puts out some content too. Check out those as well. Cheers, and as always, best of luck in your performance efforts. I'm Brian Wilson. Thank you for listening.